ANC Connect with me, Comrade Palo. Today we have Comrade JJ, who is the Deputy Minister responsible for Justice and Constitutional Development. Now, Comrade JJ has been working really long for the past 10 years on this newly signed act, which is the Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, and today we're really happy to have you in studio today. Welcome, Comrade JJ.
Thanks, Comrade Palo.
Now, Comrade JJ, as we start off, let's just try to foreground sort of the context in which this act comes in, right? So our Constitution has been lauded as one of the most inclusive. It protects a lot of different groupings in our country, and yet there was a need for this bill. Can you take us through what was it about our Constitution in its current form, and what were we seeing on the ground that made us feel as though there needed to be an intervention in the form of this act?
Yeah, well, the bill, or basically legislation, gives effect to rights in the Constitution. There was a view from quite a wide group of people that there needed to be legislation specifically on hate crimes against different groups of people because people are becoming victims of hate crimes, not because of who they are as an individual, but because of the group they belong to or they're seen to belong to. So that's where the logic for the bill came, and it does two things. It makes hate crimes an actual crime. For a hate crime, there has to be an underlying crime, and then it has to be committed because of a dislike of the group the person belongs to. So, as an example, you throw a brick at a mosque, it's normally malicious injury to property, but if the state can prove that you threw the brick at the mosque because you don't like Muslims, it becomes a hate crime. And then the other aspect of the bill is the hate speech provision. We've got a crime, a common law crime called criminal injuria, which is not particularly well defined, and that usually gets used to deal with racist or homophobic things that are said. So we've got that crime. We've also got PAPUDA, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, which sets up equality courts, and if your rights to equality have been violated, you can go to the equality court. And that gets used by people who are complaining of racist behavior, homophobic behavior, or any other form of discriminatory behavior in terms of speech as well. But the problem with that is it's a civil remedy, so it's up to the person who's been abused to raise it. We wanted to also make hate speech a crime so that the state has a duty to prosecute.
Okay. So when we speak about let's say hate speech, what exactly are we referring to, right? I understand that the context changes from country to country, right? So maybe some of the things that you'll be able to say, for example, about the Holocaust, maybe you won't be able to say those things in Germany. And I'd understand that this act would also take into cognizance the particular sort of context South Africa finds itself in. And I think my question is to say, what is hate speech in relation to this act? And I ask this also because we've had in the past, for example, where we've had kill the Boer, for example, in songs, right? And there are sectors in our society that believe that that's not hate speech because of sort of the history of that song. And there was an F white people sort of slogan as well. I think that also had some legal challenges. So in that debate, where does this act put us in terms of defining what hate speech is, and how does it take into cognizance their historical sort of place that South Africa finds itself in?
Yeah, well, look, the definition of the crime in terms of the act is a person who intentionally publishes, propagates, advocates, makes available, or communicates anything to one or more persons in a manner that could be reasonably construed to demonstrate a clear intention to, one, and these are the two conditions, be harmful or to incite harm, and promote or propagate hatred based on one of or more of the grounds listed in the Act, is guilty of the offence of hate speech. So that's the actual crime. You've got to basically, there's a lot of misinformation being spread that this is about people's feelings getting hurt or people's subjective views, but you've got to actually communicate, and it's a wide definition of communicate. And it must show a clear intention on the part of the person who's doing the communication to be harmful or incite harm and promote or propagate hatred. So those are the two conditions. When it comes to, this is the same definition that is in Papuda after it was amended by the Constitutional Court in the Kwelane judgment, which was about the late Mr. Kwelane's homophobia. But we've had the two cases you've mentioned. Because it's, I presume there are children watching, the comment or the slogan of F star CK white people was an issue that was taken to court, to the Equality Court, and that was a display at an art exhibition. And the court found that it wasn't hate speech because it was artistic display. On the issue of kill the Boer, kill the farmer, that was taken also to the Equality Court. It was against Julius Malema. The court found that because of its historical context, it wasn't hate speech. So the court does look at the history issue. That judgment is being appealed against, so we'll have to see. That was a High Court decision. We'll have to see how that goes. But basically, it's the courts that are going to decide, and they are going to be looking at historical context.
Sure. So as an ANC comrade, I know one of the main things of the ANC is that we're looking to get at the end social cohesion, right? So we're not looking to put the rights of others ahead of others. And so I would imagine that there would have been a lot of sensitivity when it comes to this particular act, right? Because, for example, the churches, the religious groupings, would have had particular strong views about certain things. I'll make an example. So I would assume that there would be those who are highly religious who would have had a lot of objection to the act because of their views on homophobia per se, let's say. So I wanted to understand what was permitted there, what is not permitted.
Okay, there's a different bar for journalists, artists, academic researchers, and religious people or people who are proselytizing, who are preaching. So they've got a higher bar. And for everybody else, it's, as I said, it's got to be harmful or promote harm and promote or propagate hatred. So basically, you say really harmful things about people. You say that gays and lesbians are going to hell. That would probably be hate speech. When it comes to, though, religion or churches or places of worship, so mosques, whatever, the bar is higher. The requirement is that you can't incite violence. So you can't promote violence against a person. So my own view would be that a minister would be able to say that gays and lesbians are going to hell, but they would not be able to say that gays and lesbians must be attacked, must be harmed, must be killed, those kinds of things. I do think there's a bit of a contradiction with why people, some religious people, pick on sexual orientation issues, because and there's a chapter in Leviticus which says if a man lies with a man, they must be put to death. But that same chapter says if parents abuse their children, if children abuse their parents, those children must be put to death.
And adulterers.
If people commit adultery, they must be put to death. So we've got to be asking people, but why focus? There are 3 issues there amongst many others. Why focus on this one when the other 2 are not in use anymore? So there's more leeway for people that are proselytizing. That would be preaching.
Would you say, in your experience of different acts that have sort of come into play, do you think that this particular act, that the courts are going to have sort of difficulties in enforcing some of these things? So in terms of being on the line between protecting free speech and sort of also abiding by what this act says, do you think that there will be a difficulty there?
All our rights, none of our rights stand out, including the right to free speech or freedom of expression. None of the rights stand out on their own. They're all balanced by other rights. So what one's looking at here is the right of freedom of expression versus balanced against the right to dignity, so the dignity of the people. And I think maybe in the beginning there will need to be some borderline issues that need to be cleared up by the courts, but I think it will be determined pretty easily. You spoke earlier of social cohesion, and this bill is not going to end racism or homophobia or Islamophobia. But it's basically providing, and there are provisions for monitoring hate crimes and also for prevention of hate crimes and hate speech. So there are those elements. But this bill is basically the potential punishment. We've got to do more about social cohesion. So this is only one part in the fight against hate crimes and hate speech in South Africa.
Sure. And I think as an ANC comrade, when this act was sort of being improved through the years, so I understand you've been working on this for quite some time. On a political front, if I may ask, which parties were those who were most against, and what were the arguments that were brought forward against the act?
Look, this bill has been pushed by the African National Congress. But when it came to, it's been an extensive process. I think it started in 2016 about when the first draft was published by the department, and we had engagement particularly with religious leaders, religious people at that point. And it's been around for a long time. It had to wait for the Constitutional Court in the Kwelane judgment to define what was acceptable and not acceptable. So it's been a long path. But when it came to a vote in Parliament, in the National Assembly, all the parties supported this bill, so it's not just an ANC bill. It's a bill supported by the majority of parties in Parliament. The exceptions were the Democratic Alliance, the Freedom Front Plus, which I assume would be concerned that, well, Penny Sparrow was a DA committee member of her branch, or I think she might have even been the chair of the branch. Freedom Front Plus, unfortunately, it's often Afrikaners who say racist things, so they're probably worried about their members. And then it was the ACDP, which would be from a Christian perspective, and then Al Jama. Yeah. Everybody else supported it. PAC, UDM, EFF, etc., IFP.
Okay. So the ANC always says we are a leader of society, so at times I try to also bring it back to the queer rights that we have in the country, to say that I'm not sure that if there were to be a referendum on some of the things that we have, for example, let's say termination of pregnancy rights in the health sector, the LGBTQI plus rights that we enjoy, I'm not sure if we were to take those to referendum, if we would have the majority of South Africans supporting. But the ANC at all points has refused to be sort of a populist party and has protected the rights of our most marginalized, and sort of where they've seen it necessary, we've sort of chosen that route versus the populist route. I wanted to understand from you, do you think that, because you did say this won't end homophobia, it won't end racism, what do you think of legislating first and then hoping that mindset sort of follow? Do you feel like that's something that's been working for us? Do you think that if the laws start, then sort of it changes how society perceives particular issues as time goes on?
Well, look, I think definitely when it comes to sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., rights, I think that our history has shown that you make the laws and society tends to catch up. So, for example, with the Civil Unions Bill or Act, it had to be, which allows for same-sex marriages. It was actually a Constitutional Court judgment that said there wasn't the right to equality of people of different sexual orientation was being adversely affected, that they couldn't get married. The ANC could have left the courts to just the ruling to take effect, but decided to pass legislation. When that bill, and we were, I think, about the third country in the world to pass legislation on civil unions or on marriages for people of the same sexual orientation. I'm sure if we'd had a referendum, it would have gone negatively. Since then, in terms of opinion polls that I've seen, there's often surveys done, it would appear as though the majority of South Africans accept the rights of lesbians and gays, bisexual people to get married. So society does move. But you've often, I mean, look, the reason we have a Bill of Rights and it's protected by a 2/3 majority is not to give in to populist views which may be wrong. So we went for termination of pregnancy, which was a very controversial bill, but it was to protect the rights of women, particularly young women who become pregnant and then are basically landed with this baby. The father disappears and they have their lives forever altered. So, I mean, another area is the issue of the death penalty. It's a very emotive issue. People want revenge, but the problem with the death penalty is if you've made a mistake and then you've executed the person and if they were innocent. And then two, there isn't any statistical evidence that it actually is a deterrent. But I'm sure still if we had a referendum on the death penalty, it probably would go, the people would support the death penalty, but the rest of the world is abolishing the death penalty. I think one of the more recent countries was one of our SADC partners, Zambia, which abolished the death penalty.
No, I raise this because I know that there are parties, even in this election period, which are sort of campaigning on the basis of reversing some of the legal sort of steps that we've taken as the ANC. And I think it was important to hear it, because I know that's my opinion, but to hear it from someone who's been working with laws to say, look, there is evidence that shows us that even if a law was not popular when it came, it helps in shaping society's mind, and I think the ANC should continue to have that. I just wanted to turn our attention to, I think even with the NHI bill, there's sort of like a sentiment of, okay, well, all of these bills are there, all these acts are there. On a practical level, what does it look like? So now that this is signed, what does that mean? So if I go on Twitter, and I understand, Comrade JJ, that you're saying that this is not, I think I watched something of yours where you're speaking about how with this bill, in the past, the rights of gay people, the rights of all different groups were there, but it was up to me to sort of go to the court and ask for assistance, right?
Yeah.
So before this act, right, if I understand it correctly, the onus was on me to go to a Human Rights Commission or wherever else to sort of find justice for where I feel as though someone has been hateful towards me.
Yeah.
So on a practical level, with the introduction of this, if I'm on Twitter, or X as they call it now, and someone says something very homophobic towards me, what happens now that wasn't happening before?
Well, I don't think they would, it would have to be something homophobic just towards you. If they just say something homophobic, it's not targeted at a particular person. But the issue would be you could go to the police. Well, firstly, let me just say the bill has become a law. The president has signed it. It's now an act. It still has to come into effect, which would be set at a different date. There are certain things that need to be done. The National Prosecuting Authority have to issue directives relating to the prosecution of these cases. The police have to issue instructions. But when it has taken effect, you would be able to go to a police station and lay a charge and report that this hate speech has been committed. And then it would be up to the police to investigate and the prosecution to prosecute. So it's different to before or with Papuda, which you can still use. You'd go to an equality court, but you'd probably have to get help from somebody like the Human Rights Commission to go there.
I understand it will also help us in terms of tracking hate crimes.
Yeah.
Right. For example, I think when you want to sort of attack a problem that we're having in society, it's difficult to do when we don't know what's the prevalence of that. So, for example, with, let's say, murders that happen to people who are in the queer community, with this act, we'll be able to call them as that. So when they're there, they'll be called that, and we'll be able to document the extent of the problem, if I understand that correctly.
No, that is correct, although what we're looking for is not murders of people in the queer community per se, but murders of people in the queer community because they're queer. So if you happen to be in the middle of a bank robbery at the wrong time and you get shot, your sexual orientation doesn't matter.
Sure. Okay. But we'll be able to see, for example, just like GBV, right?
Yeah.
With gender-based violence, a murder between two men, that's one thing, but one that's domestic violence is then recorded differently and punished differently. So I'm assuming in the same way. This
is harsher, but it also will, things change. So we did have a problem, and it's why we've got a national task team in the department on Sogiesk rights. And that was 10 years ago, 2013, there was an increasing number of attacks on lesbians. And so that sort of comes and goes, but one can then be able to track, is it going up? Why is it going up? Those kinds of things. And the same would apply. This is not this is not only an anti-racist, anti-homophobic act. There's other categories. Albinism is also covered by hate speech because of the vulnerability of people with albinism. Ethnic social origin, an important one, nationality, migrant, refugee, or asylum status. So if you start saying things about illegal immigrants that could result in them being attacked, it's race, religion, skin color, and then obviously sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, or sex characteristics.
And then lastly, Comrade JJ, when you look at the act as it is now, are there any sort of like personal views that you have to say, look, I wish that this part could have been strengthened a little bit like this? Is there anything that you see that you're saying, okay, I'm really happy with the product, but I really wish we were able to really word this part a bit stronger or word this part a little bit less stronger?
No, I'm happy with the act as it is. I mean, yeah, the act as it is.
And then lastly, today is International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. Do you have a message for everyone that's watching for us who's part of that community?
Well, I think the issue is we've, as ANC and the ANC government in the last 30 years, we have done a lot for queer people, people of different sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, or sex characteristics. And that needs to be looked at, that needs to be remembered. Often people forget. So we are, I think, very much one of the world leaders in the fight against homophobia and, or the fight against biasness against queer people in all its forms. And we really, I think, as ANC, as the ANC government, have delivered on that.
Continuing with our conversation around the prevention of hate crimes and hate speech bill, today we have Comrade Steve Letseka. Comrade Steve is a National Executive Committee member of the ANC, also is the founder of civil society organization Access Chapter 2. Comrade Steve has also been given the responsibility by the ANC to lead our fronts on sector engagements as well. So Comrade Steve becomes also very important in sort of getting to the nuts and bolts of such a sort of contentious act. Comrade Steve, welcome. I think first and foremost with your many hats, I want to say as an activist for you that interfaces a lot on the ground with a lot of LGBTQI plus work. Also then again with this responsibility given to you by the ANC to be our sort of point when it comes to the engagements we have with sectors such as the religious leaders, such as the traditional leaders. You know, when we speak about in an act like this that's speaking about hate crimes, that's speaking about hate speech, there are many contentious sort of things that are part of that. So how would you have said your experience has been in the introduction of this act?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Look, the act is not new. We have actually been doing this at least for the last 20 years, where we have really reflected, you know, on what constitutes intolerance, you know, also given the fact we have a history of oppression and a history of colonial legacy. Now, for a country like ours that have had these systematic challenges on the basis of race, on the basis of sex, and also on the basis of sexual orientation and ethnicity for that matter. So these battles, you know, that carries intersectional picture to it. What is it that we will not tolerate as this South Africa today? What is it that we will not tolerate to divide our society? And I think the ANC is, you know, the oldest liberation party in Africa and also, you know, globally, that have observed, that have experienced, that has collected knowledge around what constitutes liberation and what is the things that we will not, you know, advance that perpetuate discrimination, stigma, and inequalities that threatens freedom and equality for that matter. And I think hate crimes and hate speech, you know, when you look at it, it's these nuances that sometimes we take for granted because, you know, the things that we speak with our mouth that may lead to victimization, that may lead to judgments, that may lead to stigma and discrimination are the very same fabric that we find our society with so many social ills that does not build the nation in any way. So for the last 20 years as a country, when we said that everyone is equal before the law, we meant exactly that. And we've done it in our constitution, you know, in 96. But we've also done it in our Freedom Charter, you know, to stipulate the things that we really would advance around human dignity and integrity. So this was a good move for South Africa. This was a good move for the world to observe. When you say democracy in practice, you actually mean it. But we also have to look at it in a way that must speak to society. People are diverse. South Africans are very much diverse in a way that you have to honor, you have to respect, you have to embrace, you have to tolerate, you have to accept. And that's the nature of our country. And the sectors of society that ANC has constantly led has done it in a way that embraces everybody. And I think we have brought that kind of leadership as a country, both in the organization, in society, but we've also taken it as our responsibility in government.
So in this social cohesion sort of outlook of the ANC, what would you say have been the biggest challenges in combating the same hate speech and hate crimes, so that have been mandated us to sort of come and bring this new act? What were the gaps, or what were the challenges? Why were we not able to sort of eradicate or get a bit closer to our picture of this one sort of nation that's not divided, that's unified in all our diversity?
It's societal attitude. You know, you would understand that hate, I think our, you know, former president, you know, Stallion Nelson Mandela said hate is taught. You know, the anti-rights, anti-gender movements teaches these fundamentals that creates hate. And unfortunately, there are two, you know, societal fabric, you know, or institutions that are misunderstood, misinterpreted. You know, people use and abuse religion to really spread hate, and religion is not about hate. And all types of religions, you know, are not about hate. They're about love, and they're about non-judgmental. They're about God, and really they're about people and justice. But religion now is even abused for that matter, and is misinterpreted. And I'm not a theologian, but there are theologians that actually depicts how some of the challenges around that. And that brings about societal attitude towards diversity and minorities. And then you look at culture. There's a phenomenon, what constitute, you know, an African, being an African, a Western phenomenon that is brought into Africa. But when you actually check and go through literature, you actually see how Africans were even liberated before laws were even introduced. Just merely by virtue of Ubuntu. And when you look at the principles of Ubuntu and the teachings of Ubuntu, where you find it in all different African clans and ethnic society, that motoke motokabato, you know, that there was extreme level of respect. There were extreme level of honoring. Every child in society becomes your child. Every adult in society becomes your elder. And there was that level of respect. But we've lost all of these things because of attitude and behavior in society. And that's what mushrooms victimization and experiences of people being abused, violated. And when you look at our laws, there's nothing wrong with our laws. In fact, the Constitution as a supreme law on its own does provide a framework that allows guidelines, legislations to be developed to enable South Africans to live freely, and to live with dignity, to live and be able to experience freedom. And that's what we wanted. And unfortunately, when you see different divisions in society, they will really express themselves in a way that is not welcome or it's not appreciated.
Comrade Steve, what tangible differences? So for a person like you and me, with the introduction of this act, many people like to say that detractors of the progress that the ANC has made as it relates to the LGBTQI plus community, some of the critiques are that, okay, well, we've got all of these great laws, right? But on the ground, some of these things are not felt. So I want to understand, as it relates to this particular act, what are the sort of course, after all the legal processes have been completed, what are the most immediate and tangible differences we'll start to see as people who would want to benefit from an act and protection like this?
Well, I think you need to look at it in two ways. One is what the purpose of introducing law really means for people. One is the protection, that people will feel that I'm protected by these laws. And this is for every South African, because this law is not protecting only just LGBTI persons. It's protecting anyone who may potentially be discriminated on the basis of their race, anyone who may be discriminated on the basis of their gender. It's many grounds that are listed in our Section 9 of our Constitution. Sorry. The second aspect of this is that when an act of this nature is committed, what happens? Now, this now speaks to perpetrators. So you either avoid committing such crime, because this is not a new law that replaces another. No, this is an addition to already existing criminal procedures. And it then says, when you investigate such, you have this kind of guideline that helps you. Now, any potential perpetrator, because I will say potential until you unlearn certain things, is that this is what you will be subjected to. Is that if you are going to assault anyone, if you're going to rape anyone, if you're going to murder anyone, there will be an additional measures that may actually put you much more into prison for that. So those are the immediate one in a kind of legislative or judicial processes that must happen. But the second part, or the third part, is what happens in society. What hate crimes law helps us to do is to go back and deal with the moral and national building. We've got a responsibility constantly to deal with civic education. The laws we have are just a part in terms of existence, but it's about education, informing and creating awareness around them that actually educates people in terms of how you can and how you should be behaving in society. We come a long way. South Africans have that responsibility to learn and understand the rights, limitation, and obligation or responsibility for that matter. And if we do that consistently, we will have a better society. We will have young people actually living in society feeling safe, feeling protected, but also feeling nurtured and taken care in society. And that's what we want to do. We don't want society that only can hog into the laws, but we want society that can feel that they are in a space that they can live freely, and should anything happen, then they've got a measure to really protect themselves. And I think for me, the biggest part of these laws, whether you speak about gender-based violence, whether you speak about hate crimes, or you speak about any other laws that are introduced, South Africa deserves a space of safety, net where they can prosper and where they can contribute. And I think that's the missing lens. We are not talking a lot about that. That's what we want to change. And I think as a country, we've done a lot. Where investment that needs to go is to change the fabric of how we live, how we coexist in society. But that also is married by many other elements. You can't avoid talking about the economic situation of people, because the more people are empowered, the more people have got means, the more people have got things to do, the more you reduce some of the challenges that we have. So the big part, and if you look at the ANC manifesto, the investment now, the 6 priorities that we are having in our manifesto, the fact that you want to reduce unemployment, the fact that you want to really keeping people into the workforce, you already are creating those opportunities to reduce that. But you also are then saying that you look at how we do nation building and the role of civil society, the role of faith-based sector, and so forth, to deal with some of this fabric. I'm not also saying that the crimes and some of the criminal activities that are happening are only happening to those who are unemployed. No, even those who are in the workplace does have a potential of embarking on criminal activities, and that's what we want to address. But I think the society is the big part of this, and research have demonstrated this. We've done a lot on legislation. It's about society, and every South African must ask themselves, what am I doing to actually contribute to nation building?
No, 100%. I think as younger activists, Comrade Steve, it's always good to see new sort of acts and new legislation come into our country, because we're there firsthand to experience them at ages where we're able to sort of understand what they mean. And then in part of that then looks like us not knowing that there were actual laws that there was at the time when those things were not there, right? And some of these things start to seem like they've naturally always been there, and they weren't civil society. There was not an ANC government that was sort of fighting against a lot of those who would object to some of these things. And I think there are many sort of ANC-led sort of initiatives within the queer community that have been there that seem like second nature. But I wanted to draw from you to say which of the many sort of legislative and otherwise maybe grounds have you said, okay, you know, when this happened, it was a really special moment for me. When this happened, it was really special. When I visited this African country and I saw that they don't have this one, it reminded me how sort of, just to remind us, some of us who I think we've grown up as born frees, and some of the things that we see as older people now, we're still young, but some of them, it's almost as if they've always been there. So just to draw from some of that experience from you.
Yeah, I mean, you're mentioning a very important point, Paulo. I think we must accept that we've got almost like a 3 kind of generation in our country now, and it's happening possibly everywhere else in the world. You've got those who were born during apartheid, and of course those who lived longer, who were born even before. But then you also have a generation that I consider transitional generation. They've had an experience of both. And then you've got those who were born after 94, right? And all these 3 generations have got very different generational missions. But the big part, particularly for the transitional generation, and which is, you know, you're over 35 going up, right? And the point here is what was there and what was not there. And how you have to cope with systems changing. The Bantu education and having to transition from, how the system of education was operating then to the new OBE systems and the ones that have happened even post then. And you are quite right. Many of these laws did not exist. You would have to accept that the colonial laws that were introduced, the British laws from the British Empire, were holding on to. Even some of them exist. If you're talking about the current discussions even now of decriminalization of sex work. I mean, it's a law of 1956. It's a very old law. Is it speaking to the generation now? It's different. But then you also look at what was introduced to saying that everyone is equal before the law, and which is the Constitution that actually frees everybody. This is what frees everybody. And then you're saying, what are the prescripts of these laws? We never had hate crimes laws. We never had same-sex marriage. We've never had the very same gender-based violence laws that we have now. The employment opportunity that we see now. The BEEs, all of these laws were introduced to say we are introducing mechanisms and laws that will guide and frameworks that will guide this country. Now, what do you do with them? Because you need to implement them so that South Africans can feel they are actually being spoken to, because it's something else when it's black and white, but it's something else when it's practical. And I think if you look at the programs that have been introduced from the policies, from resolutions of the ANC up to now, they speak to South Africans. And where there's a point of contention is the bystander syndrome, which South Africans must see to being party to the implementation of these laws. So people want the laws. When they are done, is not be a bystander. So for me, I think we've had aha moments, at least for the time of my own involvement. We've had aha moments, and I think even just yesterday, the president signed national health insurance into law. We have called for a universal health coverage. That says that what people have experienced before democracy, where in the Transkei, people did not even have a clinic, had nowhere to go, where doctors, one doctor was responsible for 400 white people. But for black people, one doctor was responsible for 50,000 population. That was unheard for. And you can see the progress up to date, where you can still see that one doctor still shares about 1,000. But where we say reduce the burden of care, it's the same thing where you say reduce or prevent or eliminate any kind of discrimination. We have progressive laws. And those aha moments of what we've seen yesterday with NHI, what we've seen 2 weeks ago with the signing of hate crimes into law to say end discrimination, end stigma, end inequalities, those for me are aha moments, because we are getting somewhere. At least for a person like me, who has a daughter and who has been fighting to say we want everybody free, I'm hoping that my daughter, at a particular stage, she will experience that freedom. And this freedom that we want to be realized for everybody can be enjoyed. Because right now, you and I are speaking when Uganda and Ghana and Kenya and Nigeria have introduced anti-homosexuality law. But you and I can sit here freely and talk. And I think we don't have to be hard on ourselves as South Africans. But we can actually look at the agency of saying we can do better.
So I wanted to ask Comrade Steve to say, you're speaking about bystander syndrome, and I was thinking about how even someone who doesn't know much about what's happening in the Middle East and Palestine and all the conflict that's that side, but because of the ANC government's insistence on the issue and sort of trying to be sort of a cut above the other countries and saying something about what's going on there, you find that almost all South Africans can sort of tell you what's happening there, and we're all sort of like on one side when it comes to that progressive move by the government. Do you think that as a country we are strong enough with our LGBTQI plus rights and where we are as a community to sort of lend a hand to the countries that you've just said? Do you feel as though South Africa is at a point where we should be putting pressure on the ANC government. I mean, as activists, I think it's our responsibility at times to also raise those questions. Do you feel as though we are strong enough in how we live our lives and how our things have been legalized and our legislation and how we experience South Africa? Do you feel as though our movement puts us at a place where we could be of assistance to countries like Uganda, Ghana, so forth and so on?
Yeah, I think it is the ANC that has introduced a very radical foreign policy of standing up for rights. I think we are a template that is always observed internationally. And I think all the time you're going to have to experience an extreme political will and drive that moves around issues of solidarity. And I think Palestine, Ukraine, South Sudan has been examples. And I think politically you look at what are those thematic issues that you need to focus on. But I think if you look at the ANC resolution, you know, our Lekgotla resolution, so I can even call it Makgotlas, because we were very clear on saying a better Africa and a better world. So indeed, we are ready. But we can't do this alone. Civil society organizations have been very strong. We've got friends, you know, in the region that we always work with, even other political parties. But even if you look at some of the progress in the region, we've been part of those conversations. Botswana decriminalized, Mauritius decriminalized, Mozambique, Angola, Seychelles. This is progress. It's already giving you a nature of what is happening. And these, many of the countries I've listed are in SADC. Now you have to then look at what is happening in East Africa, in West Africa, and so forth. Can we amplify? Can we be more vocal? Can we be more and play a diplomatic role and so forth? So I think we have been very strong in other areas, and we can be very much more stronger in these areas. Civil society is not stopped to speak out. And so as our own role as an organization, as ANC, we will have to continue doing that. But we have a role, and we can do much better and faster.
Okay. And then lastly, Comrade Steve, today is International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. Just a message for those watching from you to them.
My message is that, you know, South Africa is a country of possibility. IDAHOT, which is observed globally, to really raise awareness around violence, discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. We can actually show the power of solidarity for all. We no longer want transgender persons being murdered anywhere, not here in South Africa and not anywhere else in the world. We no longer want lesbian and gay people being violated in any way. We want people who are free to be able to contribute to their family networks, to be able to contribute to the economy, socially as well, but also to be able to be themselves and to love freely. So we have the opportunity during IDAHOT to reflect as people of the world, but also to look at what else can we do to better the world. So I wish everyone well during this IDAHOT, and I hope that there can be more solidarity and partnership and unity, you know, within civil society movements, within political movements, but also within governments, where we can respect and honor people for who they are.
Thank you, Comrade Steve and Comrade John Jeffery, for joining us today on ANC Connect. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us again next time on ANC Connect.